Hey everybody! Today I'm going to be showing off my Ice Barbarian. He's a pretty chill guy. Basically, so I saw this item in Path of Diablo called Runemaster, and it's basically the same as it was in Diablo 2, except that now it seems to add 60 cold damage for every rune or gem you add. So I really wanted to make a build around this, and I started with trying to use 2 Runemasters, each with 5 perfect sapphires. The problem with that is that it's really not worth the payoff. So I decided to just try and make a Ice Barbarian in general, centered around with the requirement that I have to use Runemaster. So I'm just sharing that today. So for my items, I obviously have Runemaster with 5 perfect sapphires. If you're trying to make just Runemaster viable in general, there's lots of better things you could put here. You could probably put like 5 low runes or literally like anything. Um, and it would probably be better than this. But I really wanted to take advantage of the 60 cold damage and make it like a cold build. So I did 5 perfect sapphires because it's the most cold damage for how much you can put in there. I know some people are going to say, why didn't you put 5 cold facets in here? Just to be clear, Rune Master does not work with cold facets. It's only runes and gems. It doesn't work with jewels, unfortunately. For my helm, I have a 3 socketed Ariats with 2 cold facets and a melee splash. The melee splash is required. I know that there might be a question about why I don't use Nightwings here. That's just because Ariats gives so much stuff more than Nightwings that it's really not worth the 10% extra cold damage, in my opinion. For my amulet, I just have a generic rare amulet plus 3 skills. And then for my rings, I have lifesteal attack rating rings because I desperately need the attack rating. I'm using Nosferatu's as my belt, Waterwalk as my boots, and then using Doom as my second axe. So like I said before, I tried using 2 Runemasters. It just doesn't work very well. Doom is super useful, mostly because of the increased attack speed, as well as the minus to enemy cold resistance. That minus 45 is huge, actually. Um, so I would prefer using that. If you were to do like a build like this, honestly, probably better to have Beast than Rune Master, and you could probably still get a lot of cold damage off. But it's just, yeah, like I said, I'm just trying to force Rune Master. Then for my gloves, I'm using Ghoul Hides. This is just because of the mana stolen. I do have other glove options, but until I have a mana stolen ring, I wanted to keep with Ghoul Hides. And then finally, for my armor, I have an Ormus robes. I have the facets for a 4 socketed Ormus robes, so ideally I would get one of those. I just don't have the actual Ormus robes yet. And then finally, for my charms, ideally for your charms, you want a bunch of attack rating and cold damage charms. So this would be like Fine Charms of Winter or Hibernal Charms. But currently, I just have a bunch of skillers. That's because I just haven't found the charms I want yet. But I do have a few cold charms here. And honestly, having a ton of fine cold charms of winter will really add up because this build should ideally get something like plus 100% cold damage with all the facets and stuff like that. Um, Moving on to the tree. So one thing I definitely would not recommend specking the same way I did here. So I maxed Frenzy and Concentrate, and then I only put 1 point to Cleave. The reason is because Cleave adds physical damage, and I really wanted the cold damage to be the star of the show. If you were to recreate this build, I would recommend maxing out Cleave for the extra damage and clear. It's definitely better. Combat masteries are pretty standard. Edge mastery because I'm using Rune Mastery. And then for War Cries, obviously maxing battle orders, but since I have extra skill points, I can start putting points into Shout thanks to the fact that I didn't max out Cleave. Alright, just to show the build, I'm going to run a cows. So I'm going to mute my mic and play this, and I'm also going to probably speed it up a little bit just to show the gameplay a little bit faster, because otherwise this build is kind of slow. The time here is starting at 6 minutes, so we'll see how fast I can clear this. I have not tried this before. All right, so it took about like 12-ish minutes to do cows, which isn't that bad. But I think something to think about is that um, this is already like a build with, especially with the Ariats and the two facets that I have already, and as well as Doom. This is already something like a 4 or 5 HR build, whereas you could just put Harmony on a Boson, which is 0 HRs, and essentially clear cows in about the same amount of time. Um, So I don't think the build is that great. I'm sure plenty of people have seen Runemaster. I know I've actually ran into people who, when I've told them what build I was doing online, they've said stuff like, "Oh yeah, I thought about doing similar or something like that using Runemaster." The truth is, I just don't think Runemaster is that great. The number one way I would, so how I would improve the build is I would switch this honestly for Beast. I know you could say, well, you could put Faith on an Act One mercenary, but that's at that point, is it really like for a meme build like that is like this? Is it really worth spending that much when you could just put Beast and have a really good Frenzy Barbarian without it? Um, Obviously, the Ormus robes are incomplete, but really, I don't think that would have helped the clear time too much because I mean, it would have only been like plus 20% um, cold damage at best, and with Doom already and the two fastest I have already, like the cold pen wouldn't make that much big of a difference because I'm already taking away so much of it. Definitely for sure the charms. Actually, there's tons of damage missing just from switching out the charms to hibernal charms, because essentially every like if you think about it, if you have 10 cold damage per slot, that's 120 times 4 is estimating is about 500. I know it's 480, but it's going to be about 500. So if you have plus like uh, 50% cold damage from all your gear, then that's going to be like an extra 750, which is a good amount of damage for sure. Um, as well as just the attack rating. So something a little misleading here is that this attack rating here is my frenzy attack rating, but you have to remember you have to land shots first before you get frenzy. So you miss more attacks if your attack rating is low, which means it takes longer to build up your frenzy stacks. But really, let's talk about Runemaster, because I think that's what really everyone. I think that, at least for me, and I know other people have seen this item and said, well, can I build around it? I think currently the item is just too weak. I personally think that if you allow it so that facets can work on it, I actually think it would be a very good item. Something that you could actually put a build around, and you could run, like, not even kidding, like 2 Rune Masters with 10 facets. And I know that's super expensive, but I think that would be like essentially an end game, basically an end game viable build, because it would just do so much damage with the cold pen that the only thing that would stop you is enemies that are both physical and cold immune, which I've only run into like one ever. Um, I know someone might argue, well, maybe Rune Master isn't meant to be an endgame item; it's meant to be a leveling item. But if that's the case, it's level 70. It's required level 72, so it's not really viable as a leveling item. And it's not really viable as an endgame item, in my opinion. Like, I don't think you could use Rune Master for a good Ubers build without spending, I don't know, tons. I'm not sure exactly how I would do it. I'm sure I could do it, but I'm just not sure how. Um, the the other thing you might say is like, well, not every single item needs to be good, and I totally agree. Like, I'm not out here looking at Shadowfang and saying, well, lore wise, it should be a really good weapon. Um, but the big thing here is just that it's weird that Runemaster got essentially this new passive in Path of Diablo. Um, so it seems like like there's some desire to make this like some sort of at least it's been made, in my opinion, to a very interesting item, right? I don't think any other item that has this effect where it gains damage based off of what you socket into it. So it seems like it was meant to be an interesting item. Um, it personally just is. It's just not a good item, which I think is a little bit of a shame. I think there's new build options that open up if it were better. How I would personally change, well, so I mentioned there's 2 ways to change remaster. Well, there's 3 ways I think to change remaster. One is to just let jewels work on it. The problem with that is that it's too easy to find. So I understand that you don't want such a powerful item like found so easily. Um, the second is to just increase the cold damage per socketed rune / gem. That would also work. So you don't have to use facets. If it just, let's say it had double what it does now, like it adds 120 cold damage per socketed rune or gem. That would be like so much damage that like it actually would be probably enough to like clear cows way faster. Um, so I think that's another option. But once again, the question is, do you want a very powerful item so easy? So I think, honestly, what I think would be a very cool change to Runemaster is if they keep it the way it is, but they let facets work on it, but it doesn't come with 5 sockets anymore. So that way you have to actually roll the 5 sockets. That means it's still like an expensive and rare item to get, but it would still be like viable end game item. But honestly, this is just like a minor nitpick. Um, if Runemaster is always just this and never good, that's fine too. I just saw it. I thought it was a cool item, and I want to make a build around it. I still think Path of Diablo is a great mod. And thanks, Greeding Dude, for everything you do.